So, about 6 months ago, a novel was released into the world, and I didn't write this novel, but I have to say that I've never been as personally invested in a novel, in its, reception, in the possibility of it finding its readership, in it getting the, critical praise it deserves, than this book, and that book is my dear friend Thomas Kohnstamm's Supersonic, which was a novel that, we kind of talked a lot about during the process of writing, and, I'm gonna give you, like I did, recently with Jess, I'm gonna give you a little synopsis of the novel, via Goodreads because, that way, you can track the conversation better, but this will give you a good idea of just the sort of narrative achievement we're talking about here. When PTA President Sammy Hasagawa Stallworth petitions to rename a Seattle elementary school after her late grandmother, she ignites a battle over the school's future and the history of its surrounding neighborhood. Supersonic launches readers into a kaleidoscopic tale of generations of interrelated families who breathed life into that small hilltop community. The story cuts in time from the arrival of the white settlers' ships to the last indigenous landowner fighting to hold on to the scraps of his ancestral home and back to the school's PTA auction. It interweaves an opioid addicted 19th century con man come civic booster, a disgraced Navy seaman building an airplane that travels faster than sound, a stay at home dad hustling to open the city's first legal weed shop, and Sammy's grandmother, a Japanese internment survivor who founded the school's once celebrated music program. This novel traces their false starts, their triumphs, and the heartbreaks through booms and busts of the Yukon Gold Rush, the Jet Age, big tech, and beyond. By exploring the converging and often clashing personalities that make up the dynamic soul of a place, Supersonic illuminates themes of identity, displacement, destruction, and reinvention that gave rise to the great American cities. What did I say about the novel, you ask? Masterfully rendered and mercilessly readable, Kohnstamm populates these pages with insight, hilarity, emotion, and unforgettable characters. Supersonic is a novel with so much narrative propulsion that it manages to live up to its name. So it is a great pleasure for me today to be joined by my dear friend, this week's fresh face in hell, Thomas Kohnstamm. Thomas, thanks for playing, buddy.
Going on, man?
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, I should first say before we, I've given the synopsis during the intro, and we're gonna build to talk about your most recent book, The Genius Supersonic. But first thing I should say is this podcast would not exist without you. I mean, you were one of the first people that pushed me. Jason was another. You guys pushed me to you'd been saying for a long time you should have a podcast for it, like for years. Like you should do a podcast. You should do a podcast. You should do a podcast. And then I finally found a partner who was willing to like do all the heavy lifting. And it was like, voila, it just magically happens. And Jason's just magically doing all the work. No, but I mean we were both acknowledging that earlier on our call that we wouldn't be here without you. So thank you for that.
Well, it seemed like an obvious thing. So
yeah, it seems less obvious to me all the time because I didn't know there'd be such a learning curve. I thought, because I'm a big mouth, right? I'm like, I do this all the time. I get in front of people and talk. But, there's that learning curve of like, oh, wait a minute. I'm not the subject of the interview anymore. It's different. So it's been a learning curve. I'm not as good as, I'm getting better, but I thought I'd be an immediate natural too because I can get up there and hit my own talking points, but whatever. It's different. One of these days, Jason,
I've been enjoying. I think you've been hitting your strides. I've been enjoying the recent episodes quite a bit.
Good. I feel like we're getting better. Anyway, I'm really excited to talk about Supersonic, and I wanted to talk also before we get to that, we're going to talk about Lake City, as I often do with the artist. We're going to go through your whole oeuvre, as you taught me how to say. I always said oeuvre or whatever, but we just call it the oeuvre. But there's something before we get to Lake City and Supersonic, which is right in my wheelhouse because I love hearing about people's unique jobs. I've had a cop, I've had a ER nurse, and you got your start as a travel writer. In fact, your first book, Do Travel Writers Go to Hell, was your first publication before the novels. But I want to just dive into what that job looked like, and when this was too, because this is pre-internet, this is pre-Condé Nast or whatever. This is like, what do you call it? Lonely Planet days. So take me through your career as a.
Well, it started even in a lower level than travel writing. I started with phrasebook, where I'd been an exchange student in Argentina, and then I had been a like taking groups of high school students to do community service projects in Costa Rica, and I saw this huge gap between Spanish in Argentina and Spanish in Costa Rica. And as a young guy, I've been writing down like swear words, basically like differences in slang and how to say things that were entertaining to a 21-year-old guy. And I realized all of a sudden I had like amassed this like mini glossary of slang, and I had this idea while I was traveling to pitch Lonely Planet on, like, I had no idea what pitching was. I wouldn't have even known what to call it. I was just like, I have this information. Maybe somebody wants to buy this. I didn't know anything about editors. I just went to it was like customer service at lonelyplanet.com or info at lonelyplanet.com, and emailed them from an internet cafe on the other side of the planet. And it was just
Internet cafes. I remember
yeah,
that.
internet cafe, exactly. And it was so because I've seen in the back of one of their books, they had Latin American Spanish phrase book for all Latin American. I was like, there's a big difference between different regions. Maybe they want, I was thinking maybe a little something to put in the back of one of their books. And I got an email back that was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's do a book, right? So I was just out of college, and I sold it's probably the best-selling thing that I will ever write in my life, because it's still in print for 20 something years now, and they sell it in like airport like spinner racks and shit. And so it's in the airport in Costa Rica now, whatever, is this Costa Rican phrase book. And so I mean, I started just doing really basic writing stuff, like going in and doing translations, and like, where can I find the hotel? And the computer didn't even alphabetize stuff back then. I was like manually alphabetizing the whole thing. But I got paid $5,000 for it. I thought I was rich. I sunk that right back into going back out on the road and traveling more. And that one thing after another led to me getting a break to go write travel guidebooks for them. And also I started to spin that off into writing for magazines and writing for newspapers too. So I spent a big part of my 20s then on the road, basically one project to the next.
How does the
uh,
assignments work? Do you get to pick where you wanna
yeah
go? Are they assigning it to
yeah
you, or.
so I mean, my beat was mainly Latin America and the Caribbean. And so my first project was in Brazil. They give you a lump sum, and my first book is a lot about this. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was very much like the end of this golden era of backpacking trail paper guidebooks. Lonely Planet was a big deal at the time. It was like the go-to for a lot of backpackers from all over the world. And I was covering like party towns in northeastern Brazil and going to Venezuela, and it was wild. It was a lifestyle. I would come back frequently with like thousands of dollars in debt. The first project or two, you're working for your byline, and you're like, I'm a Lonely Planet writer. This is amazing. And there's parties, and 2 days here, 3 days there, just one town to the next. It was absolutely wild. But
And this is
you
what
know,
year? This is the '90s, right?
early, well, I sold that first phrase book in, I think, 1998, 1999. I don't think I really hit the road for them until the very early 2000s. So
Still a very
yeah,
different time, though. You could still
a
have
very different time.
casual, intersexual, uh, uh, occurrences and
Well,
things like that. I mean,
well,
I always kinda
I
thought
think
you
that
must be kind of a slutty kinda travel writer, because 'cause you're
uh,
unburdened, and there must have been
yeah,
some casual.
you obviously haven't read my first book. Both of both my
Oh,
mom
shit.
and my wife almost
Well, I
died over
named
the
the
total.
3rd one, so I'm off the hook.
Yeah, there you go. but the total amount of sexual content is rather high in the book. But yeah, no, it's, I mean, but to a bigger point there, yeah, the internet did exist, and cell phones existed, but there was still this ability to go abroad and you were completely cleaved from your regular life. Whereas nowadays you can, you can take your device and take this and be in a, I don't know, a hotel in Beijing. I can watch the same Netflix stories and be
Yeah, you can set
messaging
your
with,
Facebook to
yeah,
whatever country you're on and stuff like that too. I've
yeah,
had that
yeah. I
happen
mean,
accidentally.
yeah, well, and so distance is just not what it was, and it was definitely, I was traveling, um, in sort of edges of the world, if you will, northeastern Brazil. I was up there traveling in towns that are just in the middle of sand dunes, or we were going up going up the beach, where is this lunar landscape where you're in a Land Rover on the beach. You're not even on roads. And you come to a river crossing, and there's like a skiff that takes, like they pull the boat across, and it was amazing. It also just wasn't sustainable. And one thing that I wrote about was that they didn't like when I did, after years of doing this, I wrote, what originally started as a novel and sort of transformed into memoir through the publishing process. Um, that Where were they going with that? That that they churn through a lot of young, starry-eyed writers that just like, I want to tell my friends and family that I'm a travel writer, but
Because
after
how
two
well are they paying you? I mean, it seems like a
nothing.
lot.
I
I
mean,
mean,
nothing,
you
nothing. No, I mean,
you're
very,
you're
very
traveling
little.
for free kinda though, right? I mean,
You're
do
traveling
they
for free, but you're also not supposed to take freebies or, sort of schmooze deals on stuff.
do they book
And
it? Do they book the stuff for
no, no,
you?
no, no, no,
Oh,
no,
see,
because
that
you were
sounds
going
like a
so many.
nightmare to me.
Yeah, well, because you're going to so many places, and it was this absurd thing where it's like, okay, you have 5 to 7 weeks to cover an area that's the equivalent of, LA to Seattle, and you need to, tell me all the bus times leaving the bus station in LA, all the best restaurants in San Francisco, nightlife in Seattle, and just an insane amount of information. And as I was getting at, it was the kind of the earlier era that was all print based. You could say, okay, go down the beach here, and there are some good places to go out, and there's a nice hotel in town. But in the era that I was doing it, we're starting to compete with the internet and having this like super granular information, and they just wanted more and more and more. And it just wasn't. I didn't think it was really possible without cutting some corners. And then when I wrote about what I saw as the realities of the job of either churning through young, writers, or there were people who had trust funds or wealthy spouses. They tended to survive in it. Or there were people that learned how to really hustle and play the game, which is like where you're always getting deals, hookups, et cetera, et cetera. They weren't too pleased about me talking about that, and
Okay,
I
so
got
that's
pretty
this is
pretty
where there's
pilloried. Yeah,
controversy. Yeah, this is where
there was a
some
lot of
controversy
controversy.
happens.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I
yeah.
wanna talk about that because, if it bleeds, it leads. People like controversy, but
Yeah,
you
so
said that this was started off as a novel. Is that part of the problem? Because, like, I mean, what break down what the controversy was.
well, I mean, I wanted to write it as a novel in the first place, just to have a little bit of distance between the material, and I always wanted to write novels in the first place, so it was sort of a very auto-fictional novel about a young guy becoming a travel writer, pursuing his dream job, and the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes with that. Gets in the publishing process, and they're like, "Well, you're not done with this." Long story short, I was featured in on the cover of the Sunday Styles section, in an article about the realities of being a travel writer. And the next day, I had an agent. 3 weeks later, I had a book deal, even though I hadn't finished the book. My net worth was about $38 at that point, and suddenly I
Yeah,
was
that's about what
getting,
mine is now, so
yeah.
you're ahead of me.
So there we go. Circles come back around, and it was very I was offered a pretty reasonable advance on it, and I lost some of the creative control of the book. The backlash wasn't specifically to content in the book. It was more just our travel writers not going to places that they're covering. And there was we could spend the whole podcast going through all of the details of what exactly happened, but there was a smaller, lower simmering controversy that had already happened. And then when I was doing pre-publication press for my book, a tabloid in Australia that I was doing an interview with, the guy asked me, "Have you ever not gone to a place that you're writing about?" And I was like 29 years old. I was like, "Oh, I was thinking he was my friend or something." And I was like,
Yes.
"Well, yeah, of course." I told him about how I hadn't gone to Colombia on a recent book that I had been working on. And then he just kind of cut the sentence there. The rest of the sentence was that I was the lead writer on the book. I had 4 other people working under me. They were there. I wasn't supposed to go. Then where did I get the information that I used in the book? Well, I'd been to Colombia multiple times before on other projects, and I was dating a Colombian girl at the time who worked at the Colombian consulate in San Francisco. So I had access to the Colombian consulate, which actually I would say for remote research is pretty solid place to do research versus just going on to Google. But it came out in this publication as didn't go to Colombia. Where'd you get the information from some chick I was dating at the Colombian consulate? And it basically jumped from Australia to, I think it was on CNN. It was an AP. I think AP actually called me to get my side of it, but Reuters picked it up. And then next thing I knew, I mean, it just blew up crazy. It was probably a quiet news cycle, but it was on the crawl on CNN. I remember just being in my house, like I was just about to get married, and we had people coming over and whatnot, and I'm watching on CNN. It was like Barack Obama clings to guns and religion comment, Britney Spears car accident on the LA freeway, and American travel writer Thomas Kohnstamm admits to fabrication and plagiarism, which
Ah,
is,
now
yeah,
that's some disingenuous,
it,
journalism. That's like a
it's
fucking
super blue.
that's a
It super
drive-by
blew up.
piece right there.
Well, I mean, and it was a drive-by piece, but it wasn't just his piece. It was that it got picked up at the time in the sort of travel blog world, and people are just like, they're looking, nobody's doing original research anymore. They're not journalists, they're just repeating other shit and taking hot takes. And I found that a number of more experienced travel writers were pretty supportive of me, but a lot of aspiring travel writers and younger travel writers, I got a lot of well, if you don't want the job, I'll take the job, you fucking idiot. And then it just started to blow up even bigger from there, and it got wrapped in, Bush was still president at the time, and there was a lot of like, American swashbuckling American adventurism abroad and anti-Americanism sort of pushback. And so next thing it went to, I started getting death threats and people being like, just another fucking American won't leave the country to, blah, blah, blah. And it got really ugly. And I think the people telling me they were outside of my house could see me and my girlfriend through the window and had a knife. And it was pretty harrowing for a few days there. I mean, I effectively got canceled. I didn't really know what to call it at the time. And it was a few weeks before the book came out, so a lot of people were also like, "Well, this is just good for publication." I was like, "No, it's not. It's before there's even a book to buy." And I was very concerned about the plagiarists. I had my friend's mom called him up and was just like, your friend's a plagiarist, you shouldn't be hanging out with him anymore. I was just like,
You're gonna
what the
trigger me
fuck
here.
does
You're gonna
yeah, what
trigger
the
me
fuck,
because I went
yeah,
through
well,
this with pedophilia, except,
I know,
plagiarist,
I
pedophile,
I'll, t-
not 2
I'll, t-
things you
I'll
want to be called. Yeah.
no, no, I'll take plagiarist over pedophile. But not. I mean, as a writer, I was worried, and it did. I A few years later was interviewing for an editorial job at MSNBC, and it was like, so, we see these things about you online about plagiarism. Can you explain that? And as soon as you start to like well, you see what happened was, let me give you the 30-minute explanation about an
Digging your own
Australian
grave.
tablet.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just sound like you're fucking
Ouch.
lying. So,
Right.
but it didn't, the big picture thing for me was that I had this book that moved quickly and it sold pretty well. And I got to, there were some nice perks. I got to go on book tour, and on my first book, got to go to book tour in Australia and got to go to New Zealand. And, it was option and got to work with a showrunner on trying to get it on TV, and all these things happened very quickly, international rights. But I totally lost control of what that book was. I still to this day hate the fucking title that was foisted on me. I just don't like the what it became. I didn't like what it became, and it
I still like
then
the title, but I can
yeah.
see
I
you
mean,
not liking it, but
well, I guess what I didn't like about the title was just that it was I think it was made to just generate some controversy or hype, and it wasn't. I had set out originally to write a novel, and I wanted something a little more literary, and that's where I had hoped that my career was going. And I, as a young guy, kind of took the bait on something that was a little bit more of a pop culture artifact slash
Mm.
controversy bait, and boy, did I get that. And then everybody else moved on, and I was like, where the fuck do I go from here? And so I had 11 years before my next book came out, and I just went back. I was like, I really need to teach myself how to write the kind of book that I want to write, and I want to figure out what I want to do on my own terms. And it was in that period, it was actually very shortly after that book came out, that you and I first met.
at
That
the Rim Rock in Lake
Yeah,
City.
that's right. And Lulu had just come out, but and yeah, and as I read your books, and as I you got 2 3 books in, I was reading all your books, and um started to really come back around to writing fiction, and that's when our relationship gelled a bit more. And you've been great guidance and friend and mentor to me ever since. So in especially in following a DIY path to fiction, so, or to being a writer, period. As I never took a single writing class, or have kind of felt it out my own way, and have been doing it from my entire career. I've never I worked as a paralegal when I was first living in New York for a year and a half, but beyond that, I've never had a full-time job. I've always been a freelance writer and just always made it happen somehow. But within that,
You
wound it
lucky
up.
duck, dude. I've sorted rotten tomatoes in a 150-degree warehouse. Oh my
Well, no,
god.
no,
Yeah,
I've done
I
some
mean, you
shit.
deserve
I've
it.
done
You're a smart guy.
Well, I appreciate that. That doesn't I've done some shit part-time jobs around. I've worked in delis a bunch of, slicing meats, and working an 8-hour shift with the meat slicer. But that's I mean just mean in terms of in my sort of adult career, I've always tried to keep it, which sorting tomatoes is too. Like, you're keeping space for your ability to write. And you
Yeah,
hear so
yeah.
many people talk about, like, well, I'm a
Except for the
creative
heat.
person, but
I don't
yeah,
function well in the heat, dude. It was just like I
yeah.
wanted to die. Yeah, and
Well, that's why you live in the Pacific Northwest now, Tim.
I but, like, slicing meat is the perfect, I think the perfect transitional point to talk about Lake City because,
Yeah,
write what you know, they say, or at least work it
that's
in when you
right.
can. I wrote about a caregiver and a lawn maintenance. You wrote about deli work in,
Deli
ta
work.
take us through Lake City. So, when we talked to Jess last week, we learned that Jess Walter a couple weeks ago, and we learned that he, started his career writing as a journalist, his
Hmm.
first professional experience, and likewise with you, your first professional experience was as a travel writer, something that utilized your ability to write and your ability to observe. But in both cases, this was not the end game for you. You said that you always wanted to be a novelist. tell us about the genesis of Lake City, which, by the way, is Lake City is just such a great, third person close, hilarious, it's just such a great novel and such a pastiche and such uh, 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 it honors Lake City. It honors the place. You know what I mean? I remember running in to go to your first event. I think I did the event with you, maybe,
You did, you
but
did.
and there was a lady on the ferry, and she had Lake City, and she's like, "I'm from Lake City." I mean, there was a real sense of like, "Whoa, if somebody wrote a fucking song about Lake City," because to a lot of people, Lake City's just kind of the ass end, the north end, kind of, or it's kind of gets lumped in with I don't know what Linwood or something, but like it looks so sexy on the cover, and people were really excited about that. What made you think you could write that novel and that somebody would want to publish it?
Well, I think there's a through line from the travel writing is that the one thing that you're really laser focused on as a travel writer is writing about place and figuring all the different layers of detail that go into giving a reader a sense of place. And I also had to learn to do that in a very sort of efficient fashion because I had really tight word counts. Um, in my crisis with travel writing, which led to the first book in certain ways, I was like, I just don't feel like I know what I'm talking. I'm being thrown in these situations where I have to explain what a place is and the true soul of a place, and I've only been there for 5 weeks or 7 weeks. It's a lot of hot takes. And I think my the what happened is I moved back to Seattle and which is my hometown. I was born in Lake City. My mom still lives there. Um, I just started to turn that writer's focus on place toward what was right under my nose. I originally I started to write that book and it took place in Yakima, and I was trying to figure out how I was
Wow.
going to get over to
I
Yakima.
never knew that. You've
Yeah, and
never
it was
told me
called
that.
lunch, and it was actually called coming back to the deli stuff. It was called Lunch Meat was one of the original titles I
I
had for the
cannot
book.
believe in all
Yeah,
our garage drunken conversations, like hundreds and hundreds of hours, that I did not know that.
yeah. So, but I
That's
mean,
why
it
I
was
do the
very short.
podcast, to learn
Yeah,
stuff
so
like this.
it was very short-lived, that it was gonna be in, and I had, I think, I don't know, my daughter was born yet. I'm trying to think what year that my daughter wouldn't have been born yet. Anyways, I had 1 or 2 children at that point and trying to figure out time away from the family to go to do a research trip in Yakima didn't make a ton of sense, and I was walking my dog along Lake City Way, just looking at all these weird ass buildings with no signage and barbed wire and like young dudes packing cardboard boxes in the trunk of like dropped cars and stuff. I was like, what sort of strange like kratom processing is happening here? Or what's going on? I was like, this is such a weird, strange little pocket in this otherwise mushrooming city that's just, super gentrified and growing, and then there's like this part that's seemingly left behind, and I know it really well and can speak about it and mine the layers of place in a way that if you feel like I didn't get it right, then that's fine. I stand behind what I said. I can't, and that's my take on a place that I feel like I know well. No, it was also a story about a young, sort of like very ambitious guy who is from Lake City and wants more out of his life. And yeah, I was a very ambitious person growing up. I'm still maybe a little unhealthy on that front, but I think that I was just mining that sort of feeling about wanting to break out of there if I'm not going to help, and he has this attitude very much of like, if I don't, focus on myself and help myself, nobody, who is, but then it goes a bit too far and gets into the darker areas of ambition and what is he essentially willing to do to get the life he believes he deserves. It's darkly comical too, like, but yeah, it was a I think a very as opposed to the writing that I've been doing now. It was much more pre-engineered, sort of the story arc. It's a pretty cinematic 3-act structure. I spent a lot of time engineering, like, the protagonist, Lane. He's somebody, again, who's never, he's always done everything for himself, and he's never made a sacrifice for anybody else. And then sort of the Inez, the woman in the book, has always fallen on the sword for all the people around her, has never been able to, get out of her rut by making a decision in her own best interest. Their lives are intersecting in this, very sort of like long arc fashions. And I had this all drawn out and plotted, and in my, well, I don't want to get ahead too much, but I've been building my process, or sort of my process has evolved from there in more
Well,
recent
you and
projects.
I
So
have spent so much time talking about our projects together, and process is just such a huge part of that because both of us, and we're going to get we're going to get specifically to Supersonic, which where this really becomes into play for you. But I had written West of Here and Small World and some novels that where I had already dealt with this sort of thing,
I
and
got Small World
and
is right here, and West of Here is right here.
oh, God love you.
Got it.
That's how I
Get
saw
it,
that.
get
That's
it.
what I was trying to get you to do that. I was baiting you into that. No, but the point being that we've had, as much as any other conversation, we've talked about form in our process because we like these big narratives and I'm reading your novel in progress right now, and it fits the description too. There's just a lot of narrative elements, a lot of braided narratives working all at once. And that's something we both like to do, is to sort of frustrate this traditional Aristotelian 3-act arc. I mean, we're still beholden to it. Ultimately, we still have the swelling and the climax and the denouement and so forth, but it's harder to recognize when you obfuscate it with 60 points of view or 12 points of view or 8 points of view or all this intertextuality and you're using in your novel in progress. Talk to me about making that step from, I mean, not to say Lake City is a very nuanced novel, just as All About Lulu is a nuanced novel. I mean, but as Lulu is to West of Here, so Lake City is to Supersonic. That was a big step for you narratively, like to go from just kind of a single narrative focus and a close point of view to all of a sudden you've got how many, what, eight or 10 points of
I
view
don't
in
even know at
Supersonic.
this point. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I look at it sometimes now. It's like, where did these ideas even come from? Sometimes when you look, do you ever have that when you look back and you're like, wow,
I
that's
never
pretty
look
off
back.
the
I never
wall.
have time.
Yeah.
I'm always too busy driving somebody to
Sure.
school. But I think you
Yeah, no,
answered your own question earlier. It came from place. You know what I mean? I mean, now
yeah,
we've
I
sort
mean,
of established like
it's a very place. However, the book that I'm working on right now, I don't think is place driven in the same way. But yes, Supersonic is, well, let me put it this way. I don't know that in writing Lake City that I initially set out to write about place, but I did. And then I doubled down on it with Supersonic, and I was like, I'm just gonna go all the way there about Seattle and the creation of a city. I'm gonna write the story of the creation of a city. And I think for me, I mean, there are a couple levels to it. One is the level that I just really love reading books like that when it works. Like, I remember reading West of Here and just being like, where the fuck is this guy going with this? And then we have a chapter in the
I picked
donkey's
it up once and
POV.
thought the same thing. Yeah.
No, but not like I'm lost. Like, it's just that I'm just the ambition of it is just really energizing. And like, what and knowing that somebody made this with their bare hands, something created something so complex from nothing, to me is very inspirational. And then, again, I was going to say suddenly you jump to the donkey's POV about 9/10 of the way through the book. You're like, what can this do next? But it's like the sheer ambition and scope of the project just gives it this inspirational level.
God,
And
it is a big ask of the reader, right? I mean, for in both of our cases, I would say that in my case, I really took that to the limit. I know that, I mean, it's my most divisive book, like, people threw
you think
that
so?
fucking
Yeah.
thing across the oh god, like, if you look at the Goodreads review, it's by far my lowest rated book. People either loved it or they hated it. The people like you that were like, "Okay, I'm curious about what's beneath all this ambition. I'm willing to be patient with you." I think I learned to do that better, and I think you learned to do it more efficiently than me with Supersonic. I think it's a little clearer, um,
Yeah, but the
how
Reiner.
the puzzle pieces go together
Well,
earlier.
I mean, and you have that with Small World, which right here, Small World, I was there you see, get it in frame there. Um
Would stop.
and no, but it was a book that I was reading early chapters of while you were working on it, and while I was working on Supersonic 2 was also an influence. And with Small World, you have you have polished that process, and the pieces might fit, they fit together. There's just, I mean, as with earlier work in general, there's a raw, maybe there's a little more shagginess in West of Here, or certain things in the execution you have clearly learn more now. But like, even if you go back to my first book, to Travel Writers, like, the amount of energy in that is just hard to replicate when you've
Yeah, don't
written
I
multiple
listen,
books. So I
you
mean,
ask
there's
yourself,
some.
you feel like you're learning, but you ask yourself, "Am I losing something too?" Because as you
you,
grow and become
yeah.
different, you inevitably shed this skin and you actually lose some things. Like, I think I lost a little bit of quirky flair, for instance, or, some of the shagginess you speak to,
You
and some
talk about that with Jess a little bit. The yeah, the but yeah, I mean, you see it in music, right? It's like, but I think in everything is like, as one becomes, heads more towards mastery, which is the goal, and polish it, you lose certain aspects of youthful energy. And so I mean, I guess that's my long way of just saying that while, parts of earlier project, I mean, I even see between Supersonic and the project that I'm working on now, how some of I worked backward to make things happen in Supersonic. I was like, that was kind of a mess. I shouldn't have done that way. But I mean, imperfect novels, that keeps them human, though, too. I guess the other point that I wanted to make about, for lack of a better word, sort of polyphonic, braided, complex novels, is that that's where there's so many forms of entertainment nowadays, right? It's very easy to turn on streaming, or or to lose yourself in your phone or whatever VR device, et cetera, et cetera. But I just think that a complex novel that can deep dive in different areas is where the art form really can't be replicated. That's just a real strength of the form, and why I believe that the novel is going to be around forever. I don't I you know it the size of the overall reading audience might change, but it's you're just able to do things to push the form and possibility with it, in doing these wild, imaginative, complex projects, and on top of it, not having to have. Yeah, I mean, some of those things can be done in a, complex, limited series with a, cool $100 million budget. But this is like somebody who's dedicated and has an imagination. You can really create something unique
right, and
and
AI is not
beautiful.
going to be able to AI can do a lot of things, it's amazing, and I think I mean, you could maybe teach it all the tropes of a mystery and it could probably come up with a mystery that's probably kind of clunkily written or whatever, but like it could probably figure out the tropes, hit the beats, and do that. But AI is not going to create a character like, say, Freddy, who walks around in these Daisy Dukes with one of his nuts hanging out, who lays down bass tracks to vintage porno and dispenses advice. But I mean, like, it doesn't have any reason to create that character, right? So it won't. So I think we're
Until,
kind of safe the
until
more
we
character driven
fully
we are.
upload your brain into the into the cloud. But
I
yeah,
want to
no,
talk. Oh, sorry.
well,
Go.
let me just say one more thing before we move on from that, though, is that yes, AI will continue to improve, but I mean, the novelist on the other side of it, I feel myself very, or connecting with at least an imagined version of the person on the other side of it. I think that
Oh, yeah,
that art that where you're connecting with the creator of it on the other side of it will
totally.
endure, if not increase in value, as we just have more and more slop thrown our way. So
Yeah, it's a
that's my two
dance.
cents.
We can't you can't lose the dance because, I mean, I know I'm anathema for saying it in certain circles, but like the reader is my greatest tool, Thinking about like when I'm talking to my workshoppers, I'm always talking about two things over and over that I beat in their head. The first one is make promises for the reader. Now, I see a lot of these HBO and streaming shows do that. They're really good. They make all these huge promises in the first 3 episodes, so they're understanding that, but then it just unwinds. I don't know if it's the writer's room, the nature of too many voices, but they write themselves into these corners and then they never answer those promises. And the other thing I'm always telling them is inference. Inference is so important. Don't tell the reader. Lead the reader like a dance where they're doing everything you're doing backwards and let them infer the story. I don't think AI is going to create, I think AI is going to create something that's going to just give it to you. I don't think it's gonna know how to dance with you. So anyway, I'll bury that.
As a reader, I like nothing more than when I'm in a book and I feel like I've figured something out, whether it's an Easter egg or put two and two together. I like what that's like, so invigorating and exciting, and it's like you're figuring out this puzzle. That's amazing for me. And if the writer can easily just tell you this is because of ABC, then it's like,
Yeah, we
okay,
live as readers for that aha moment. I had so much fun writing again and again because I'd never written an unreliable narrator. I mean, you make the argument they're all unreliable, but because of subjectivity, but it was so much fun to lead the dance where Eugene is leading them to these inferences and conclusions and then get to completely undermine their information and then force them to
you're
recontextualize everything
spoiling
they
the end
just
of the
learned.
book.
Oh, well, whatever. I've already got 2 more out since then, so, like, it's yesterday's paper. I gotta concentrate on them reading that once. Alright, enough about me. I wanna talk about, because we're already at 40 minutes here, and I wanna talk about what I feel are some of the more fascinating decisions, you made in Supersonic. One of them being, I mean, it's not even really an argument to me. This is the quintessential Seattle novel, and yet you told me this. I didn't even notice this I've read it a couple of times. I read it in manuscript. I read it when it came out. Seattle is not named one single time in the book. And I think that's so, I mean, it's clever and everybody doesn't, I mean, clearly it has an effect on the reader, but the fact that you never said it once, I don't think anybody is gonna get that. That's some 3D chess there, dude. Explain that decision. I like
Well,
that. That's
I mean, that's like the top level thing that's not named in there, but there's actually nothing is named in there. Um, there's a big tech company called Mothership in there. There is an airplane company which I refer to as America's preeminent aerospace company at a couple points. But what I was really trying to do was, in certain ways, it's such a Seattle specific story, but I was also trying to write about it at arm's length. And one of the things that I thought about a lot when I was writing it was how New York is represented in the Royal Tenenbaums. It's like this sort of alternate reality, bizarro New York. It's not actually New York, but I wanted to create something that was kind of my own version of the soul of this place without being beholden to the surface level details, because I think that actually distracts. And then something that I've heard you talk about with nitpicking on facts about, let's say, about railroad stuff in Small World. I didn't want somebody to be like, well, that's really happened in spring 1971, and you clearly have this in, around, this is happening at Christmas of 1971. I wanted that space also for me to make the I'm not writing a history book here. I think that book is doable. That book has value. Maybe would, even though I'm kind of lazy on my overall research, I might have the skill set to write some version of that. But I wanted to have fun writing this. Write it like character based, or write it emotion based, and so I needed to free myself from some of those specifics and get again at the sort of focus on the
Right.
spiritual component
I
of the
feel you.
place.
So it doesn't get in the way of the story you really wanna tell. That's why I called Port Angeles Port Bonita, because I got sick of old guys going, "Well, you can't tell the story of Port Angeles without talking about Wheeler's Corner," and I'm like, "No, no, 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 I just gotta change it."
Exactly. And then it's liberating, but then yeah, you can depart reality in certain ways there, which serve you as a writer, serve the story, and can make the whole I don't know. I also feel like you have to be having some degree of, I don't I'm the first to admit that I don't always find writing enjoyable. I love being in the flow state of writing when it's going
Mhm.
well. Sometimes the grind, but you have to have it enjoyable on some level, because I
Yeah,
mean,
writing
that's going to come
exposition can
through.
be drudgery
Yeah.
at times, yeah.
Yeah.
Another fascinating narrative decision you made is that you've got 3 or 4 timelines, right? Refresh my
Mhm.
memory, and what are
I
they
mean, so
precisely?
it takes place in the 1890s. I'll give you the times, and then we can. I
Okay,
want to hear
yeah,
your question, and then I'll come back. But
yeah.
1890s, 1950s, 1970s, and 2010s, with a little bit of 1850s in there, and maybe 1900. So there are a couple
So
of
there's like
smaller
5
points
or
in there.
6. So
Yeah,
my
it's a lot.
question, and what I think is so fascinating is that, and this dovetails back to what you were just saying about wanting the freedom to just tell your story, but you didn't approach the telling of Seattle's story with the obvious timelines, which would be the Klondike Gold Rush of the 1880s, or the World's Fair of 1962, or the cultural and technological zeitgeist of the early 90s, which made it even more like what you're describing, your deconstruction of Seattle, because the historical one would have had to have used those touchstones, I feel like, because those are significant tectonic, culturally changing watershed events for the city, and yet you didn't use any of them. Talk to me about that choice.
Well, I think my goal was to use offbeat moments to if you want to read about the music industry in Seattle, it's in the 1990s. There, in terms of a historical account of that, it's been done. A lot of these things have already been covered, and so while the Klondike Gold Rush is in there, but it's indirect. It's more about this guy who was promoting, hyping Seattle, or hyping the city as the departure point, and basically how this was all sold versus the gold rush itself. And then I kind of was looking more specifically at boom bust cycles in the background. So the 1950s is like peak jet age post World War II. 1971 is the cancellation of the supersonic jet by Boeing, which serves as the title of the book, and B, the central metaphor of the book, of reaching high, falling on your face. I can come back to that if you want, but and then the 2010s was sort of liftoff for Amazon, the maturation of the tech industry here, legalized marijuana, etc. So I was looking at it as this like boom bust, but like which also follows nifty sort of dramatic narrative arcs too of rises and falls. But I wanted to just look at the creation of this place from sort of offbeat, lesser known moments with lesser known. There are a couple of characters based on historical figures. The last Duwamish landholder in Seattle, this guy who essentially functioned as the publicist selling Seattle as the departure point for the gold rush, but almost everybody else is straight up fictionalized. I
Which
think
leads
everybody
me
else to that. Yeah.
Which leads me to what was gonna be my next question, which is again about, fascinating decisions you had to make in the process of writing in this book, and that is, how did you construct your ensemble cast? I know how I go about that. I wanna know, how did you construct your ensemble cast? Did you have any mandates in that respect about, like, diversity, or I have to inclusion, or was it more about, like, this character kinda deals with this idea and this guy, you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
What were your kind of
So,
personal mandates for constructing an ensemble cast?
yeah. So, I mean, it started, one of the crazy things about that book is that I didn't really start with a super clear vision or any clear vision of what it was to become. I started with this auction scene, a public school, elementary school auction, and stay at home parents in this power struggle. I just thought that was like a weirdly sort of comedic starting point. And then next thing I knew, I was writing about one of the characters' moms a generation back at the same school as a teacher. And then I was like, oh shit, I think I jumped the timeline here. So it grew somewhat organically, but I think in being tied to the place, um, it was like, okay, there are different sort of cultural, ethnic and cultural threads that went into the establishment of this place, which was uh primarily Japanese, Scandinavian, Native American, African American, those threads, sort of cultural threads, revealed themselves as, there was no mandate per se in that. But I felt like to really tell the story of this place, those were lines that needed to be revealed themselves as needing to be covered. But it just grew and grew. There was another, so this book at publication was 15,000, 115,000 words, 112, 115,000 words. I'm not sure what the final was, but I had another 30 that I cut out of it. So, um, coming back to process and evolution of process, and this is something that you helped me um with, just without helping me to not shit my pants or run into traffic at a few different stages, was like I was saying about my earlier books, that I was, cork boards and everything drawn out and knowing what it was. Like this was much more of an iterative process,
Yeah, writing
or
yourself into it. Yeah.
writing myself into it, of really being sort of just sitting there. I mean, I always try to get myself in the trance and feel that character in my head, like that method actor experience. But I really went for it with the whole story. It was really more about getting, and that's not to say I didn't still put 3x5 cards up on the cork board to be like, this is what I want to get out of, here's a beat in this scene, or this chapter has to accomplish this one plot point. But everything beyond that really flowed out of the process. And I increasingly see writing as this sort of meditative. I mean, it's something that I do that helps me to stay sane, because I have this, I'm walking around with a typhoon in my fucking head half the day, and it's just, I just, am taking a break from writing right now, just because I'm at a a point with this current project, and the first day I started coming up with business ideas for, like, I'm thinking it's just like overactive thinking all the time. I need to sink my uh, uh, sink myself into something, and allowing myself to take off sort of the safety gates of having everything be pre-planned
Yeah,
was
just
a great revelation. Yeah.
getting the fuck out of your own way, man. That's why, I mean, for me, the process is like yoga. I mean, it grounds me completely. It doesn't matter if it's published, really, at the end of the day. That's a whole nother set of worry. But this is one of the reasons I mean, I'm just so proud of you because I mean, I'm honored that you consider yourself to be like a protege or whatever. And we got this
No,
sort of
for sure. 100%.
Flaubert de Maupassant thing going, but we've worked so closely together and spent so much time talking our way through Supersonic and for me, Small World, and again, and now your novel in progress, which is another big swing for the fences, which I just love. I do have one more question about that if I have time. But what tickles me more than anything, more than the great writing and the growth, your growth as a storyteller, which I'm seeing, I'm just totally tracking it from book to book, is just how much you love the work. How much you know. I've talked to you on days where you're like, "Fuck, I finally got to write again today," and it just that's what I mean, just how much you love and don't forget why we're really doing this. It's really easy to forget when, you know, art and commerce are such a awkward dance, and I'm as guilty of it. I mean, you have to talk me down from the ledge all the time with career stuff,
Well, it's
and you're like,
hard. It's
"Hey, man,
hard.
you're in an enviable position. You've got a legacy, blah, blah, blah." But I'm like, "Yeah, but I got this bill, this bill, this bill," you know? So, but, like, I'm really proud of you for really seeing it for truly the gift that it is, that it's not it's more than just a it's more than just a craft. It's this exercise in imagination, this exercise in empathy it makes us more
But
expansive people.
exercise makes it almost, I mean, it almost becomes like it's like a life undertaking at a certain point, right? I mean, I agree with an
Well, my dad
exercise
was a
makes it sound.
bodybuilder, so maybe that's, you know, that's
Yeah.
why I conflated exercise with
Yeah, no, I mean, we're just debating like the single word in there. I agree with your overall point 100%. But yeah, it's a great gift to have this thing in your life, this creative outlet that I can spend. I mean, I'm just naturally a person who spends a lot of time swirling in my head and thinking things and evaluating things and have like these just pinging ideas. And to be able to take that and put it into something is and channel it is just so invigorating. And when it's I mean, when it's going well, it's a drug essentially.
Yeah,
It's
and the
it
dog is
every
walking you half the time, you know? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
it's liberating. You're not controlling it, man. Maybe your unconscious is, but when you're really going, it's like the thing itself, I call it, it has a life of its own, and it's such a gift.
And I was almost gonna say you learn so much about yourself, but it's almost more that you learn the process. I feel like I'm learning so much more about the world, not necessarily about myself. I'm learning beyond myself. You learn about all the multitudes that you contain. It's and you say an exercise in empathy. It's a very powerful thing to write a character who is 40 years older than you, or a different gender, or a different race. Like, to you are spending days, weeks, months on time trying to inhabit their headspace, and finding that within, that Thomas is the primary character in my conscious mind, or that I'm this is how I walk through the world. And but there's a lot more going on in there to explore, and to have a structured, productive way to do that, and not just be raving at people on the sidewalk, is again is a great gift. And to be able to explore stories. And yeah, I again, it's not always fun, it's not always easy, but it's extremely fulfilling.
He is Thomas Kohnstamm, he is Kohnstamm, however you wanna say it. I just call him
I
Tommy
don't know, just call me
Kohnstamm. All right.
Thomas.
He is, for my money, one of America's greatest novelists. Keep him on your radar.
That's very
Don't
nice of
believe
you.
me? Check out Supersonic in Lake City. Thomas, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for being our fresh face in hell this week.
Thanks, man.